Hi, I'm Jarrett Fuller. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. How does a design change once it's entered the world? How is the experience of being inside a building different than looking at images of the building on an architect's website? How do the ways we communicate and share our work influence the perception of it? And perhaps most importantly, how do we represent this reality of the lived experience of the built world? For the last almost 20 years, Ila Bêka and Louise Lemoine have been tackling these questions through filmmaking. Trained as architects and art historians, Bêka and Lemoine's films have punctured the dominant discourse around architecture and the built world in an attempt to present a more authentic, a more accurate, a more human portrayal of the spaces we inhabit. Their first film, the quietly provocative Cool House Life from 2003, goes inside Rem Koolhaas's famous residential home as it follows the housekeeper to understand the daily rituals, maintenance, and lived experience of that building. Their films have increased in scale and in scope, giving a glimpse of our environment that we rarely see in monographs or portfolios, let alone in cinema. In this conversation with Bêka and Lemoine, we talk about why filmmaking allows for new forms of architectural discourse, how their work functions as a type of design criticism, and how to close the gap between the idealized imagery and the authentic lived experience. Scratching the Surface is funded through our Patreon. Patreon supporters get bonus interviews, full transcripts, an exclusive monthly newsletter, and more. Students can support the show for just $3 a month, and we also offer additional tiers at $5 and $10 a month that come with additional bonus content. Head over to patreon.com/surface podcast to sign up and get immediate access to all of those resources. We really appreciate your support. It truly helps keep the show going. Thanks so much for listening, and here is my conversation with Ila Bêka and Louise Lemoine. I was watching an interview that you had given recently, and in the interview you said something to the effect of you'd like to remain outsiders, and in many different disciplines. Your work sort of spans nonfiction, kind of documentary film, it's architecture, it's sort of social sciences and ethnography, it's a type of video art. You're sort of moving between all of these. And I'm wondering how you describe your work to other people now, whether that you're at a party and someone asks what you do, or, when you're sort of being introduced at a lecture. Simply, how do you define your work, or how do you talk about these films that you're making?
It's always a difficulty, honestly, because as in any kind of discipline, we need categories, we need easy identifications, or we need to put you in a sort of very clear case, or and it's true that for now almost 20 years we have been working because of also our backgrounds, which are diverse. I mean, Ila has trained as an architect, but he doesn't do the architect. I trained as an art historian, but I left that behind as well. Of course, we brought in our practice all what we have behind, and we made a sort of mix with all our interests and skills and everything. But at the end, we ended up making films in a very free way, and because of the thing of the of our production way, of our way of producing films, which is out of any kind of structured uh, context, which is not looking for the normal cinema funding system, etc., but working more as video artists with art commissions, etc. We don't belong to any of these streams, or let's say networks. That's it. And I think when you are a producing artist or a producing filmmaker, any kind of active individual in the field of filmmaking, in some ways, your production system defines where you belong. But as each of our films invent a little bit its production system, we don't belong to one specific place, but we like bridging and jumping from one place to another. And that's on our side. We think it's enriching, but it's always difficult to define ourselves to people who do not
Right.
follow that kind of flexibility. So it's not an easy. I cannot give an easy answer to that.
I expected that, and I was sort of that sort of cross disciplinarity that you're speaking of is sort of what I was expecting, and what I think I'm drawn to in your work. And you mentioned both of your backgrounds, and maybe now is a good time to just sort of talk about those and how those influence the filmmaking. Ila, you were trained as an architect, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about. Louise said something to I forget the exact phrase she used, but she was like, "He's trained as an architect, but is not an architect anymore, or does not do architecture." Can you talk a little bit about that trajectory and sort of that frustration that you maybe had studying architecture and working as an architect?
Yeah, because I would say that since the beginning, I knew that I will not be an architect at the end.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm not an architect in the sense that I'm not building physical things,
right,
maybe, but there's many architects they don't do that. So
right,
in a sense, I'm not an architect because I have a kind of distance. I think that not so many architects have with architecture, and it's a distance that is related what Louise just said, that we are not in a perfect category, in a perfect field
right.
where you know how to act to build your career. We don't have to build a career. We don't know how to build a career because don't know where we are going. In a sense, we are making things that we are interested in, but once is a filmmaking, once another one is a book, another is something else. But we have just something in mind, I think, and not belonging to these categories gives us
Freedom.
we
Mm,
call it freedom, but also it gives us a kind of distance, not to understand better what we want to do, and not how we have to act to be the best in that category. And what we want to do is a kind of reflection. In my case, for example, is a reflection about the power of architecture. And
right,
I realize studying architecture and being concerned by architecture, that the architecture has an incredible power that is completely underestimated, underestimated from everybody, from people, from all the citizens, because we live in an artificial environment that we build ourselves as a we. When I say we, is as
hmm,
human beings. We have built everything. We live in cities that we are 100% built before being born. So we spend all our lives in an artificial environment, and this artificial environment we build it ourselves. So it's incredible how we are shaped also by this environment, and so architecture is the result of is not the result, is the tool to change this environment, and so on, to change ourselves. But we don't know it. We don't know it because also because we are very interested also in this. We don't teach to children, for instance, or even to other people, what is the power of the architecture, what is the power of creating a good environment. And we can we you when you go to school, we always say this: when you go to school, you can learn mathematics,
hmm,
or languages, or science, everything, but never, no one will talk to you about what is a space, how to be conscious, to be aware of being in a space, and how to be conscious also about the quality of the space. That's for me, when I studied architecture, that's for me was the big question, the very big question of all my years studying architecture is why no one is talking about this, talking about not how to build a good building, but how to know if you are good or not, if you feel good in a space. No, working on yourself more than on the buildings, more on the walls, or more on the construction. No, because when you study architecture, you can understand very well how to make a beautiful
need to be a technician.
a technician, how to build a good building, but never, there's no study, there's no teachers about how can I be much more aware of my feelings inside the space. And this is for me is the beginning of understanding everything in general and also in architecture. If you don't know how to observe what is happening around you, and also to give a name, to try to define what is your feelings in that moment and how you can improve them, this will be difficult to have a better environment after that. So this is at the really is the starting point for all the things we made and all the other things we are creating and try to do now. And also about from our teaching experience, we are teaching in schools, and we are trying to understand why also in school architecture students they are not interested in this. They are not. I would say they are very interested, but they are not. I would say
Trained.
trained to that. So
Yeah.
this is the real the center of what everything we do. After that, we decided to do it with the film because I don't know. It maybe it's a coincidence. I don't know.
Yeah. I want to come back to that idea for a second, but I want to pick up something that you said quickly. Because you mentioned being in architecture school and sort of asking these questions. And I'm wondering where that came from for you, being 18, 19, 20, studying to become a technician, but also very aware of feeling. And you mentioned, this isn't something that children are taught in school, but perhaps should be. Why was that important to you? Or where did that sort of impulse come from? Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah. At the beginning was because I dreamt about making architecture and a
Uh,
beautiful building. So before starting to study architecture, I had in mind this as an idea. But during my study in architecture, I always found an incredible uh, border between the School of Architecture. I studied in Venice and in Paris, and
mhm,
the School of Architecture. When you enter the School of Architecture, you enter in a kind of bubble where you talk about wonderful architect, the best of the elite architecture. So everything is wonderful. There are many geniuses. They're creating super good architecture. And when you go out of this bubble, so you go home, no, you go out of
mhm,
school,
mhm.
you go out of the school, and what you find around you is not at all what you have learned at the school. No, it's complete.
Right.
It's completely different. And you say, "Wow, what I'm studying? I'm studying exception. No, I'm just here to studying exception. The world is not built like this. It's,
Right.
I don't find the same quality. I don't find that is a good thing. Obviously, you don't have to to learn at school bad things, but it's not what you see outside. No,
Right.
for
Right.
me, the reality was really very far from my studies. So I always had in mind this kind of question. Say, we are in a bubble, in a fiction. We live in a fiction, and
Mhm.
outside the reality is not like we are what we are studying. And once when I started to read some different books, and I found some books, someone talking about this that was maybe not an architect, but a writer or a
Mhm.
sociologist or someone else. And I found some books that were very very important for me, where they said, "Wow, there's a difference between the architecture, the good lines of the architecture, the high quality architecture, and what you feel in the space." And for me, it was a kind of revelation because I never thought before what is. So I was like all the kids that starting today, and start all the students that starting in school. I never thought about what is a perception of a space, what is it to live in the space, how can I, what can I do to be much more aware of my feelings in the space. And I discovered incredibly that I discovered this at the end of my study that you can incredibly create very pure spaces in architecture. They are so powerful in terms of emotion that you can.
Mm.
It's much powerful than paintings, sculpture, or even the music. For me, music is the form of art that has the more is more powerful form of art to create feelings, no? Because it's so fast. You put a sound or a music that you like, and immediately you can forget all your troubles, all your problems,
Yeah. Yeah.
and feeling better. No, it's you can do also this with I imagine with drugs. I don't know, but with the music but the music is a kind of incredible, powerful drug, because it can change your reality. You can be find
Right.
enthusiasm in really very, very, very fast. But this is something that I didn't know and I didn't suspect. It's also the space can do all the same thing. That's very strange. But if you ask around you, no one will tell you that. No one will say, when I want to feel something different, I go in that place or I go.
Right.
No, you never think about this. So I think we need to be trained to this. We need to be educated to that. And this is maybe what we don't want. Obviously, we don't want to educate on anyone, but we want to be ourselves say more sensitive.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I there's so much in there that I want to talk about, but just, very quickly, I had the same experience in graphic design school, learning about these great graphic designers from history and these sort of pristine, perfect posters or books. And then you walk off the campus and you see the sign in the storefront that the store manager just made, in Microsoft Word really quick to advertise something. And you're like, oh, this is different, but this is also a sort of type of design. I think that fiction that you talked about is really interesting. I want to connect this, Louise, to your background very briefly. You mentioned you studied art history, and I can't help but feel like that's something also similar. We sort of set art often apart from real life. We put it in the gallery, we put it in the frame. Did you sort of arrive at similar feelings in art history, or how does that background sort of filter into your work?
I'm not fully sure that it's really the studies I did
Mm,
that brought me to formulate what we're doing now. More, I think what I brought from my studies in what we do is more the topics I was working on in a research project about fragmentation, and I was very interested by formal questions of how to uh, create a sense of unity from very fragmented forms. About very, very formal questions I went through
mm,
that then we elaborated in our editing process. But yes, maybe we shared a very common approach regarding this gap Ila was talking from
mhm,
the, let's say, the mediatic perception we have of masterpieces or the mediatic creation of those masterpieces and the way representation uh, detach them from reality in a very conscious and process. And on the other side, what is the daily life reality of those places? This is something I was very
right.
concerned and very attentive to. And so that's a subject we discussed very quickly because Ila, so when we met, already left architecture for a while. He was making feature films, I mean, fiction films, nothing to do with architecture, but we shared very
Mm,
common interest in that topic. And so we gradually elaborated for the first film about that precise gap and about questioning how our contemporary architecture was represented main media, let's say. So that's why we started with a series of films that precisely deal with those questions.
Your first film was called Cool House Life, which
Mhm.
is a famous film at this point. And I'm sure you're probably tired of talking about a film that's like 15 years old. But I'm wondering if you could talk about how that um, the ideas embedded in that were a way to capture all of this that we've been talking about in this conversation. And so, really briefly, just to sort of set this up, this is a film that is about the famous Rem Koolhaas house that has the sort of rising and lowering center platform. And it's interesting to me because, Louise, this was the home of your fathers, and so you had a personal connection to this. Ila, you're talking about this sort of gap between how we talk about architecture and then how we live in architecture. And so this is a building, this is a structure that you both actually have a sort of personal connection to. How did you arrive at this idea that, like, hey, we can actually use something that we are very deeply familiar with, and we can use film to wrestle with all of these questions? How did all of those come together for you in that first film?
Yeah, you mentioned that I have a personal connection to this place, and obviously, this is something which immensely influenced the way we elaborated the film and the approach and the point of view, because obviously I had this privileged situation of knowing the daily life of that place. So I was the first to be extremely troubled and also, let's say, I was so much aware of that discrepancy between how a building was published and mediatized, and what's its real story and how its real daily life, let's say, and what are the real issues behind, what it was all about. Right away, understood that probably the most interesting and also critical point of view to adopt and to develop in that film could be the one of revealing a bit of a reality, of a daily life reality of buildings of that sort, which are only mediatized through what Ila was saying before, a sort of fairy tale or a sort of fiction. There was a
Mm.
fiction elaborated through the image making, and we know a lot about this. Recently, we had very Ila had a very interesting experience working in a photographic studio of architecture, in which he could really testify or be an observer how architectural image is a production of fake constantly. I mean, totally intentionally, on a common agreement based on the expectation of the architect and the work of the photographer and the post production of photography. It's incredible how uh, I mean, an image can be photoshopped, transformed, and cut, etc., to make it look a real photograph closer to a rendering than to reality. And so we really felt the need of introducing a sense of reality, a little bit. What we tend to say is, there has been in the history of painting this moment of rupture and of introducing the sense of reality, or even subjects that were
Right.
represented, to introduce elements of hidden that remain hidden, and so we intended to create that sort of rupture in the representation of architecture. And so we couldn't find a better topic than the one of maintenance and the figure of Guadalupe, the lady, the caretaker of this house, who was also a fantastic lady with a
Right.
great character. So she was really a sort of leading figure for that film with a lot of humor. So we thought that breaking the rules and introducing this sense of reality could be done also thanks to humor and sort of lively approach. Yeah.
I've heard you say multiple times the sort of Churchill quote, "We shape our buildings and then our buildings shape up," and that you have this sort of update to this, which I think you're speaking to right now, which is the way we represent our buildings shape the way we build. And so in Cool House Life, we follow Guadalupe and sort of see the lived experience, the maintenance, the upkeep, and that is sort of a framework that you've used, following a single person, following sort of how the building is kept up. I think this idea of mock-ups and renderings is really fascinating, and how you can sort of fake all of this. And it makes me wonder, sort of, do you see your films as a type of architecture criticism? Are you trying to have people sort of see these buildings in new ways, or how do you sort of see this? How do you sort of see your work in relationship to architecture discourse at large, I guess, is the question I'm asking.
Yes, it could be. If you mean criticism, the effort we can do to
Yeah.
try to create a kind of balance between the image that we create and the imaginary that even young architects or architects have in mind when they make a project, and something that is real. Yes, it means that
Hmm.
we try to give another layer that is not only because we always have just one layer. It's like in fashion, no? When
Hmm.
you see the catwalk, these beautiful girls with beautiful dresses, no, and everyone is dreaming to be like them. But the reality at the end is not that you cannot be like them, and so you live in a kind of frustration of not being something that you would like to be. And when you are young, and you are dreaming to be like this, they are your model. No, you have something in mind.
Mm.
Your imaginary is this, and so you will live until the day you will say, "Oh, I'm not like this," or "I'm very sad." I'm not.
Right.
It's not my
Right.
life. And the architecture is the same, because if you see if you watch everywhere the representation of architecture in the Instagram, for example. Now I know that all the students today, they have the knowledge they have about architecture through Instagram, for example. And all the images you see in Instagram are the images. They are shot during 20 minutes during the golden light at the end of the day, and
Right.
after that, every picture has been worked for 2 days from an army of people that are
Right.
redressing all the lines, putting effects, and changing all the defects. So at the end, the image that you have doesn't exist. No, it doesn't reflect what you see and this create a kind of imaginary in your head, a kind of world when you think the other people live inside, and your world is you just watch outside the window, and you say, I'm not the lucky one, because I'm living in a, in a shitty world that is not
Right.
reflecting that beautiful world that is that. So I understand we need to dream of a better world, but this is a better completely fake world, no? So we need to see more people dressed in a normal way with a little bit of belly, or all the of no, the
Yeah.
normal people. I think we need to see normal people now in fashion, and
Right.
we also need a lot to see normal lights, rain, or something. Also mistakes, errors, and I don't know, many problems. If you are we every time we give a lecture, we start by a list of things that we wanted to have in a film
Hmm.
about representation in architecture. And if you see this list, there's many things that you will never see in a film in architecture, because it's something that no one's who pays the films about architecture want
Right.
to see. Who pays for that? And normally it's the architects or the owner.
Right.
No? And so obviously, I study architecture. I know that making architecture is so complicated because you need a lot of money, like in cinema, making films. So you don't want
Right.
you don't want to pay a photographer that is taking a photograph of your building in the best shape. That's obvious. But the problem when we started to make films like this, we immediately said, okay, let's make a film about the space, the relationship we can have with the space, but in an honest way, not pretending that we live in a so beautiful world. But everyone's, not only the architects or the owners, even the student, even everyone in the world
Yeah.
wants to see beautiful picture. No, so we want this, but we at the end we don't find this in our normal world, and this creates a kind of frustration. And it's a frustration. It's the same frustration when you see all your friends in Instagram. They are all happy.
Exactly.
In
Yeah.
Instagram, everybody is happy, and you know the guy that is very sad guy. No, is he has a lot of problems, because he calls you every time, every 2 days, the same, I'm so sad, I'm not there. And at the end, you see his Instagram account. And if you don't know him personally, if you think he's the happier guy in the
Right.
world. So
Right.
we have we live in two completely different worlds, completely disconnected. There's a big gap. The same gap that I found during my studies, and in reality today is even stronger than before. So what we try to do with our work is say, don't be frustrated because the world is not like that. It's not that. It's just a fake one. It's a
Right.
so try to be happy anyway.
I mean, it's interesting to me because, to go back to your first film for a second, that is something that you had a connection to, you had a lived experience. And in your film since, you've shown buildings that, maybe are less personal. You've increased your scale up to the size, of cities. How do you can you talk about how you start a project? Do you go in with a building? Do you go in with an idea or an argument? How do you start to sort of articulate these ideas when that personal connection is maybe a little bit more removed?
Yeah, let's say that initially the way we started uh, was after Cola's house life, we understood that there was such a potential with this film, considering the, the great public response to that film. So we thought we
Hmm.
should develop further that approach on other kind of buildings or the scales, let's say. So that's why we developed the same approach on 5 or 7 films. I don't remember exactly. On with a series
Hmm.
we called Living Architectures, and this was intended to um, revert those habits of representation, taking mainly as topics buildings that were the ones of our architectural landscapes at that time. Let's say buildings made by architects that really made the mediatic attention, or the one that were the leading figures of that period. And so that was creating a sort of line in the choice of the buildings. And then we moved on bigger scales, or even bigger scales, yes. And each time we are also responding to art commissions from museums, etc., which sometimes, such as the Barbican in London,
Hmm.
proposes some challenging projects, such as depicting the life of the Barbican for their anniversary. It was very interesting, yeah, challenge. And so, let's say that we are trying to lead a personal research, facing sometimes um, production issues. So we cannot film everywhere we want, obviously, because the way we produce films implies a very also demanding opening or disposition for the place we shoot in. So because we really immerse ourselves in the life of a place, and so it requires a certain collaboration from the people
Mm,
living there.
hmm.
Because
Right.
once again, just to underline, we actually don't make films about a building in a descriptive way, but what we are interested in is to understand how architecture impact the people who live or who relate to that place on a daily basis. So let's say the living community of a building, and so that's the target. It's not just to make styles of a building, but it's really to discuss how an architecture will influence the life of the people living there. So it really requires the participation of people in an active way, and this cannot be done everywhere or in any kind of context. Or yeah.
This question is going to sound like a criticism or that I'm disagreeing with you, and I'm not. I'm completely on board with everything you're saying, but I'm wondering if you could talk about the role of editing these films and how you think about shaping them and the stories you're telling and the narrative. And the other piece to this is I was really struck in watching your movies about the audio component. Neela, you mentioned music being important to you, both the soundtracks and also just the sounds that we hear. And I wonder how you think about that editing, the addition of music and sounds and narrative, how that either complicates or adds to this idea of showing reality as opposed to showing fiction. Do you think about that at all in your work, about sort of the truth of the story when you're in the editing room?
Mhm.
Yes, I can say about very technical things about the editing. Editing for us was from the beginning was a very big question because
Yeah.
we immediately started to think about how to make a film. So we didn't study filmmaking, so we didn't know how to make a film. So we we approached the cinema in a completely different way as we do for everything.
Mm,
But from the beginning, we had an idea that we wanted not absolutely not to use all the strategies that cinema has
The tricks.
and the tricks that cinema
ah,
has.
yeah.
What are these strategies or these tricks? Is like writing or telling a story? You know, there's some rules that people are writing for cinema they know very well, and how we like a lot cinema films. We know now very well how to use this kind of strategies. For example, I don't have to explain it because everyone knows, but you have to write very well the characters and having in the
Hmm.
middle a tragedy and the end a good resolution, things like this. Even so, we wanted not to use this kind of structure because having studied architecture, I was very interested in the structure of a film, and we wanted to use a completely different structure that also
Mm,
in that case were much closer to the reality. And what is closer to the reality in terms of structure is the memory. So we wanted to
mm,
build our films like a memory works. And so we discovered, studying a lot about how memory works, that as you can imagine, memory works by fragmentation. So you have a little
right.
when you go inside in a place, for example, we were very interested from the beginning for the spatial memory. And when you go inside a building or a city, for example, and you go back to the hotel or the home, you will not have your memory of the of you what you did during the day is not like a film. It's like some little fragments that are much stronger or even or less strong. And so
Hmm.
you have a kind of collection of moments. And this collection of moments is not related by a logical consequence of the, it's not in a timeline, but it's a kind of mind map. No, we call it mind map because it's
Right.
related to the mind. And so this kind of mind map related to different fragments of your memory that you have creates your memory of that place. If you think about that moment 1 month later, these fragments are a little bit less, but are completely confused. They are not in a order. They are not in a chronological order. They are completely
Right.
confused in your mind in some
Right.
places that you have to go there to take it again to think about it. So we wanted to create a film like this, and this was a very big problem from the beginning because when you watch a film, obviously you have a chronological order. No? You have something that
Mm-hmm.
before and something after. But we said, okay, let's create a kind of collection of moments. So when we go inside the space,
I
we
see.
just collect moments like this, fragments. We don't know why, but we are totally, completely free to film everything. We film everything is important for us. And after that, we try to recreate a kind of disorder in the film,
Mm-hmm.
and you watch this film, you are in a kind of disorder constructed by little fragments. If you have watched our first film called As House Left, that is a kind of matrix for us. It says that all the other films, even today, we are structuring them like this. It's you can it's made by 25. I think 25 little fragments. If today I take them and I randomly I change the order, the film will be maybe a little bit different, but will be also a film that is the same. The experience that
Yeah.
you will have will be the same. Why this? Because there's no will to explain something, something that I have to say to you. It's just a sharing an experience by little fragments. And so for this was for us a way also to be much free from the language of cinema. So we wanted to be very free from the language of architecture, but making a film, we wanted also to free ourselves from the language and the structure of cinema. So we made this kind of hybrid
Right.
that's a very maybe, and we discovered something. Just to finish, we discovered something incredible with our first film that it works very well. So because the attention also is last for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and after that
Right.
you change it, and you have a new one, a new one, a new
Right.
one.
Mm.
Right.
And this kind of structure, if you talk about this structure with someone that is producing cinema, he will never make a film like this because he will say, I don't have this, I don't have this, I don't have this. But at the
Right.
end, it works very well. It works very
Right.
well. And we discovered that we did this much more in an extreme way with our films about the city that are called Homo Urbanus. And the
Mm-hmm.
Homo Urbanus is a kind of fragmentation, much more fragmented, and we discovered incredibly we discovered that people stay for 3 4 hours watching
Right.
this film, and with no sequence, that there's no timeline, there's no a story, there's no story, there's no timeline, there's no developing a story. So there's not anything about what normally cinema uses for keep your attention, and people stay for 3 4 hours just watching this
Right.
kind of fragmentation. So I think we maybe I hope for we touch a little bit of the structure of a memory with this kind of structure.
It's really interesting to me, and it's interesting that to use that word structure, which is a very architectural word, also. And I'm wondering if you think about these films and the editing process as a type of architecture or as a type of architectural process also. And I'm thinking about what you said at the beginning of this conversation, that there's a lot of architects who don't actually make buildings anymore. Is there still something architectural in your process in these films?
But this is completely, yeah. But I think this is my problem because I study architecture, so I'm
Yeah.
putting. We also made our film starting from a little scale and going to the
Yeah.
wider scale, like and this is typical from one that I study architecture. I know this, but in a sense, we are building a kind of new, different structure with the films. Yeah, in the editing. The editing is the construction site of the film. No, it's
Right.
like in
Right.
architecture. And so, but we are making something that I don't know if you can do it really in architecture. Maybe yes, maybe it could be interesting. We are trying to build something that is maybe closer to our mind, how we
Mm,
use our
hmm.
memory, our mind, our way of thinking. We all almost we try to do this. I don't know if it works, but it's interesting for us because we are completely free from the cinema industry and the
Yeah.
architecture too. So it's a good thing, but it could be also a bad thing because we don't belong to many fields, and this could be also a problem. It is a problem, but in the sense we gain a lot of freedom of doing this. So we can try things that the other people cannot because otherwise you are not accepted. For example, in the field of cinema, we are not accepted because we don't do things that you have to do.
I watched the talk that you recently gave at Columbia. Um, and you mentioned in there that you're working on a book right now called The Emotional Power of Space, which is a book of conversations with architects. And I'm wondering how that changes your process. Working in a different medium like this, working conversationally, has that changed how you think about your work? And what do you want to do in book form that maybe you can't do in cinema?
Mm. Yeah, actually, it's not the first book we did. We made at the beginning of our practice. We found that the book was a very good vehicle of diffusion of our films. So that because we also have a practice of photography, and were writing like diaries, shooting diaries during films, etc.
Ah,
At the beginning, we published, I think, 7 books or something like that for the first films, and then the editing, the publishing activity became a bit heavy
yeah,
to
I bet.
read well, and so we slowed a little bit down the process. But now, yes, let's say that it's a continuation also of a series of discussion we led when we were teaching at the AA school in London, and we had this seminar with which we invited a lot of extraordinary guests to discuss about observation. And
Mm.
so we brought to that seminar many people from different fields and let's say gathering together people of great sensibility. And we enjoyed very much this ability of bringing together to discuss about a common topic people from different fields and backgrounds. And so based on that, we elaborated this book project, gathering architects, only architects. At the beginning, it was intended to be um, bringing together artists and architects, but now it's only 12 architects
Mm.
dealing with the question of the emotional power of space, in the sense that we lead these architects from many different cultures and also generations to discuss not only about how they personally experience and sense space on an almost physical level, because it's very interesting that usually you can read many biographies and books about architects well known, such as Alvaro Siza or
Mm.
Jacques Herzog, etc. But
Hmm.
you hardly get to know um, their personal understanding. I mean, you know everything about
Ah,
their work, but not much about them as individuals and also them
right.
as sensitive individuals.
Right.
That's the real topic of that book is, as Ila was saying at the beginning, is to replace human sensibility at the forefront of our understanding of architecture. And so that's the let's say the key of that book was to bring all these architects to open a little bit their intimacy to us and discuss about how their sensibility to space developed, and how it grew in their life, and how they perceive, they sense, they experience space, and then how uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they develop in their own work their personal sensibility. So it was a very, very interesting process also to
Yeah.
bring these people also to probably discuss in a way that they were not so used to.
Right. Which, yeah, hearing you say that, in a way, it felt very much like an extension of the films, sort
Yeah.
of peeling back those layers, peeling back the artifice, the fictions in some way, getting to the reality. I want to very briefly talk about teaching. Teaching has come up a few times in this conversation, and I'm wondering about how teaching sort of fits into your work and what you take from teaching, and then also what architecture students can learn from film and filmmaking. Not all of them will go and do the type of work you do, but it seems like there's some value in learning how to think filmically in some way, for an architecture student. Can you just talk a little bit about sort of your approach to teaching and how you sort of think about it?
Mhm.
Yes, let's say that I would see our teaching experience about filming like a little bit of an excuse. It's a kind of a trick that we use to go inside the schools, but we really don't teach how to make a film.
Right.
It's not at all what we are teaching.
Right. I didn't mean to say you're like, hey, here's how you hold a camera.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Technically, we don't say anything. So
Okay.
just thinking about the last one that we just finished in Switzerland, in Montreal. They made film with the telephone, and they edited the film with an application in the telephone. So
Mm.
really, this is not the aim. This is not the point. What is interesting for us is making a film like an excuse to be much more aware about your feelings.
Yep.
For example, in this last workshop, that was very, very interesting in Mendrisio. The topic was tuning with space. So what is tuning your body with the space when you enter in the space, and how to do it?
Mm.
This is just the topic is a question about what discussing during the course, no, the course. So it's
Hmm.
talking about this is just something extremely important for us and for the students. And after that, you can make a film about this, but we are completely open to everything else. For example, there's someone that is making an animation, or someone else that
Ah.
is writing a text, or someone else is just making some photographs. So the medium is not really our problem. What is interesting is what is the reflection that a student is making
Right.
about this topic. And the topic was very interesting this year because tuning with the space is something that you don't know what doesn't mean. No, and yeah, and this is interesting because I can understand for you that you're not an architect, but an student of architecture of the last year, because this is a master, second year of master.
Okay.
So
Okay.
they are next year they will be architects, so they are ready to be architects.
Right.
And I find really surprising that don't know to explain what is tuning with the space. And
Mm.
because they are the expert of space, no, you are supposed, when you are finish your school of architecture, you are supposed to be the big expert of space, because like you are a doctor, people
Right.
call you because you have a problem with your body, and but if you have a problem with the space of creating a space, you call an architect. So he's the doctor of the space.
Right.
So this is what we like in teaching. Is like is pushing a little bit the borders of and the limits the school of architecture and talking about
I love
things
that.
that you normally don't do.
Yeah, I love that. I think in a weird way that sums up so much of what we're talking about today. It's about observing, it's about noticing, it's about feeling, it's about sort of being attuned to all of these interactions that happen. And so I think this is a good way to ask my final question, which is the question I used to end all of these. Usually I ask what people are reading right now, and I am curious what you're reading, but I'm also curious about what you both are watching. And so what are some of the books or the films or the cinema that you're watching and consuming and reading right now?
Actually, we are preparing a new project, which lead us to not making films anymore. But we
Oh,
have a very interesting project which will help us to explore and expand our field of action in a very broad way. And we will collaborate with an Italian biologist who is
ah,
a specialist of the intelligence of plants. And so we are fully immersed in those questions of um, botanic and neuroscience of plants, if we can call it this way. So this is a little bit the topic we are digging
oh,
right
interesting.
now. But it's very exciting because yeah, for the first time we'll do a big project which will involve more sound
Mm,
and the transformation of the scale in which you observe the world which surround us. Because I think you mentioned it in your concluding words now that observation is one of the big topic we
mhm.
let's say inquire. And I think also it's interesting to be in that dynamic of observation, but also to question the tools and the scale in which you observe the world. And so that's that last project which we will be presented at the Venice Biennale is about
Mm,
the scale in which we look at things around us, and in particular, we're at nature, and changing the scale, reducing it to the microscopic scale will help us also to develop more humility, probably,
right,
to
right.
understand that we do not control everything as humans.
Ila and Louise, thank you so much for doing this. I thought this was a really wonderful conversation. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
This episode was recorded on February 27th, 2023. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can support the show on Patreon and find previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.